I think that the mayor enjoys this opportunity to give to us what he has been hoping for a great many, many months.
What action is the JDO going to take now?
Washington, which was silent 25 years ago while 6 million died, Washington, which has been silent while 3.5 million Jews within the USSR have culturally faced genocide, will in no way influence us. The cries of 3.5 million Jews are far louder than the bleatings of Foggy Bottom. We will do exactly what we have been doing until every Jew within the USSR who wants to go free will be free.
You don't go on condoning acts of violence, sir?
Excuse me, visiting Soviet Jews say that you can only worsen their plight by those acts of violence.
Those 3 Soviet Jews that have arrived here under the auspices of Jewish establishment groups do not in any way speak for the Soviet Jewish underground. We will be bringing over in the very near future young Soviet Jews who will tell things as they are and who will cry out for Jews to do whatever has to be done to save the Jews of the Soviet Union.
What about the Jewish organization? What about the... Sir, I mean, you keep on condoning acts of violence and say you're going to continue to do so. Where is this all going to stop?
Those who started condoning acts of violence are those who are in Washington, who have condoned the violence against 3.5 million Jews for all of these years. What we state to the Soviets is that they cannot have their cake and eat it too. Those who commit violence against Jews within their borders can fully expect, and rightfully so, violence in return. The violence will end when they end their violence.
The UN's Declaration of Human Rights, and that we do not intend to forget it. And we are here to let them know that when they violate the UN's Declaration of Human Rights or silently condone its violation, people are aware of their hypocrisy.
Brooklyn, across the river, the city of friendly people sometimes called Dodgerville. 3 great bridges span the East River, linking the borough of Brooklyn with downtown Manhattan. The first bridge to span the East River from Brooklyn was the Brooklyn Bridge, completed in 1883, and the longest suspension bridge at the time. With the rapid growth of Brooklyn, other bridges became necessary. In 1909, the Williamsburg Bridge was opened to traffic, and not long after that, the Manhattan Bridge. But Brooklyn keeps on growing with a population of almost 3 million people. For Brooklyn is also a great industrial city with miles upon miles of waterfront, sometimes called the stepping-off point of the world. Brooklyn buys what the world has to sell and sells to the world about everything under the sun. Made in Brooklyn. The Made in Brooklyn trademark is known in every corner of the civilized world. Ships.
New York City in the 1930s was a city of arrivals, a place where millions of immigrants came chasing safety, work, and a future that had been denied to them elsewhere. Among those communities, the Jews of New York were building something fragile and new. They had escaped pogroms, poverty, and the rising storm in Europe. Yet they carried those memories with them. Many worked long hours in sweatshops and factories. Others opened small groceries, synagogues, Hebrew schools, and community centers. There was freedom here, but also tension. Anti-Jewish prejudice lingered in universities, neighborhoods, and social clubs. And overseas, the situation was darkening by the year. Reports of persecution in Europe reached New York constantly, creating a mix of gratitude for safety and anxiety for the future of the Jewish people. It was in this world, observant, struggling, hopeful, and on guard, that a new generation of American-born Jews came of age. One of them was named Meir Kahane. He was born August 1st, 1932, in Brooklyn, into a home steeped not only in religion, but in politics and purpose. His father, Rabbi Meir Kahane, was not merely a synagogue leader. He was a devoted follower of revisionist Zionism, a movement that believed Jewish survival depended on strength, discipline, and a sovereign Jewish state in the land of Israel. In the Kahane household, Zionism was not an abstract idea. It was discussed at the dinner table, debated passionately, treated as a matter of life and death. His mother, Sonia, came from a family shaped by the upheavals of Eastern Europe. The stories she carried of instability, danger, and the fragility of Jewish life quietly reinforced the urgency Meir absorbed as a child. Growing up in Brooklyn, Meir attended Orthodox Jewish schools, first the Yeshiva of Flatbush, later Brooklyn Talmudical Academy, where he immersed himself in Torah study. But even as a boy, he lived in two worlds, one deeply traditional and rooted in Jewish law, and one surrounded by the American street, politics, newspapers, and debate. As a teenager, he joined Beitar, the youth movement tied to his father's revisionist ideals. There he learned discipline, pride, and an uncompromising view of Jewish self-defense. He soon became known as intense, argumentative, brilliant, and unwilling to back down. In those formative Brooklyn years, the lessons of his home and the anxieties of his community fused into a single conviction: that Jews could not afford to rely on the goodwill of others, not in Europe, not in America, and certainly not in the Middle East. Those early impressions would follow him for the rest of his life, shaping the fiery rabbi and controversial activist he would one day become.
Why isn't he invited or welcome here?
Because of the views he holds, because of the positions he fosters. I call them a two-bit fascist. Isn't that clear what I think of him?
I think it's a little hypocritical for most of the Jews at Hillel to boycott Meir Kahane today, because it's just a different opinion, and you should be exposed to all these different opinions.
Much like the targets of his JDL harassment, Kahane, too, is a marked man. Yesterday in Washington, he was doused with red dye as he spoke to the National Press Club. Just as establishment blacks repudiate Louis Farrakhan's extremist ideology, Jews, both here and in Israel, dismiss Kahane as racist and disruptive to Middle East peace efforts.
The Talmud tells us that when God wanted to give the Torah to the Jewish people, all the mountains, the mightiest mountains, the highest mountains, the loftiest mountains, all of them came to God and begged him, give me the honor. I want the honor. Give the Torah on my peak. And God said, no. I have a small mountain. And his name is Sinai. And I'm going to give the Torah on that mountain, on that small mountain, to teach the Jew a lesson, to teach the Jew to be humble. That's the story. Nice story, goes over well with shul-wise. Now, to be humble. The Gera Rebbe, the Rebbe of Gur, studied this particular portion of the Talmud, and he asks a good question. A question which I'm sure is obvious to many, many people here already. And he said, there's something wrong here. If God wanted to teach the Jew to be humble, why didn't he give the Torah in a valley? It's about the most humble place that one can imagine. You don't get lower than a valley. So he answered the question with a tremendous answer, and he said, God wanted to teach the Jews two lessons. One, be humble. Two, don't be too humble. Never be a valley. Jews aren't that. Don't let people stamp on you and trample on you and stomp on you. That's not the Jewish way. There is no mitzvah to be stepped upon. Nothing good came out of Auschwitz. Nothing good. It's better to be a winner than to be a loser. It's better to live than die. And it's better to have a Jewish state that is hated by the whole world than an Auschwitz that's loved by it. I know that.
We all feel very
When the swelling
grateful
crime
to
wave of New York engulfed his community, Rabbi Samuel Schrager decided on a course of action that has aroused strong feelings of support and of antagonism. He organized the young men under his influence into volunteer patrols to protect their neighborhood. They are called the Maccabees, after Hebrew heroes of ancient times who defended their land from invaders. The community Rabbi Schrager is acting to defend is predominantly Jewish, but by no means uniform. It has many diverse national and religious factions, including those Jews who fled persecution elsewhere. The refugee finds here a tolerant community, stores that cater to his special needs using Yiddish, a kind of international second language, to keep open the doors of communication.
Before the headlines and the courtrooms, there was something simpler: fear. In parts of Brooklyn and the Bronx, elderly Jews learned to walk quickly, eyes down. Kids heard slurs in schoolyards. Shuls added locks and prayed police would come next time. Into that world came the Jewish Defense League. They wore armbands, carried themselves with confidence, and spoke a language New York understood. You don't push us around. They escorted seniors home from the synagogue. They stood outside Jewish centers when vandals threatened. They made phone calls and sometimes showed up. When a landlord, a gang, or a bully assumed Jews were easy targets. And something changed. People noticed. Cops looked twice before shrugging off complaints. Tough neighborhoods learned that picking on Jews wasn't cost-free anymore. Teenagers who once hid their mezuzah started walking with their heads higher. In certain communities, the JDL earned real admiration. They brought respect back, people said. They reminded the city that Jews aren't prey. Kahane basked in that feeling, not for ego, but because it confirmed his belief. Dignity sometimes requires visible strength.
Rabbi Kahane, you were just recently convicted in connection with this arms thing and given a suspended sentence. Now, do you back this movement for collecting arms for Jews?
Oh, yes, yes. I think this is something which, of course, I have personally wanted now for many, many years. I think that the surest guarantee to have a bully stop bullying people is to realize that there is a very good chance of his nose getting bloodied. And that's the basic reason, I think, for this. And I would hope that the people understand why we're doing it and take an active part in this campaign.
But respect is fragile, and anger is combustible. The JDL's tactics escalated. Protests became brawls. Sit-ins became confrontations. Some members embraced sabotage and plots against Soviet and hostile targets. Kahane called it pressure. Authorities called it criminal. The FBI shadowed meetings. Jewish communal leaders recoiled. Court cases multiplied. What had begun as patrols and pride began to look, to many, like militancy spinning out of control. The same neighborhoods that once whispered gratitude now whispered unease. And within the JDL, discipline cracked. Factions argued. Lines blurred between defense, revenge, and spectacle. The movement that once brought respect started attracting suspicion and fear. Kahane watched the backlash take shape. Synagogue boards denounced him. Mainstream Jewish organizations distanced themselves publicly. Journalists painted him as dangerous. He saw betrayal. He saw timidity. In his mind, America had failed a test. If Jews won't stand up here, then their real future isn't here. His thinking shifted from neighborhoods to nations. The Torah verses he quoted now pointed east, toward sovereignty, land, and destiny. In 1971, Meir Kahane made his next leap. He left. He went to Israel. To the public, it was aliyah, a spiritual ascent. To Kahane, it was also a strategic move. Israel was where Jewish history would be decided, not by protests, but by power, policy, and law. He left behind a movement struggling with its own extremes and arrived in a country still defining itself. To some, he was still the man who once restored dignity on tough New York streets. To others, he was the embodiment of what happens when outrage becomes ideology. The JDL's rise had proven something real. Jews could command respect when they refused to bow. Its unraveling proved something else. Strength without restraint can burn everything it touches. And now, the man who rode both realities was stepping into Israel, determined to shape a nation the way he once shaped a sidewalk. The question was no longer whether Meir Kahane could lead a street movement. It was whether he would try to remake a country.
Why did you try to sabotage the Brezhnev visit to the United States?
I think, first of all, let's go into the why. That's the major thing here. The why is that a détente, which is based upon the term that the Russians want, is a farce. A détente, which comes into being now, will see within a relatively short time a physical assault upon Jews within the USSR. For 2 years now, the Soviets have been watching as Jews have stood by, saying, we don't want to be part of Russia. Soviet citizens saying this. We want to leave. The Soviets have stood with clenched fists and gritted teeth, wanting to do something, but they couldn't because there was a need for a détente. The moment that they get that, they will be free to turn physically upon Jews. Because of that, it was our intention to disrupt the Brezhnev trip, because that, more than anything else, will create a permanent détente. It will convince the U.S. that it is to its benefit to have it. And after that, if it is to the U.S. benefit, there is nothing that the Russians can do which will cause the U.S. to dismantle its policy. And so letters were sent to people in the U.S. asking them to take violent actions against Soviet diplomats and installations.
Rabbi, whether you go to prison or not, you are firm in your resolve to run for the Israeli parliament in the fall election?
Absolutely. There is not the slightest doubt in my mind that we have a tremendous amount of backing from the Jews here. The problem is how to translate the support into votes. That is the problem, and for the next 90 days, we're going to try to do that by introducing here a U.S.-style campaign, knocking on all doors, and I'm not going to kiss babies, but we're going to shake an awful lot of hands.
You will have a barnstorming campaign, in other
right,
words.
in every little dot in every little village in this country.
Modern Israel did not appear out of thin air. It emerged in 1948, out of refugees, prayers, and the ashes of Europe. Out of centuries of Jewish memory anchored in Jerusalem and Hebron, and out of a political movement called Zionism, the belief that the Jewish people should return and rebuild their homeland. But the land was not empty, and the story was never simple. The road to conflict. By the early 1900s, Jews had already begun returning in waves. Arab nationalism was rising at the same time. Two peoples, with two narratives, were now living in the same territory. Tensions escalated. One early figure, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, became a central organizer of anti-Jewish agitation in the 1920s and 1930s, and later, during World War II, openly allied himself with Nazi Germany. When the United Nations voted in November 1947 to partition the land into two states, one Jewish, one Arab, Jewish leaders accepted the plan. Arab leaders rejected it, and war followed. The wars begin. 1948, the War of Independence. Armies from Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon invaded the newborn Jewish state.
But it was the rising tension in Palestine that held world attention. Partition had brought a new flare-up in the strife between Arab and Jew. Politically, the conflict appeared to be settled. In actual fact, it had only just begun. The United Nations Special Committee had advocated separate Jewish and Arab states as the uneasy compromise. The plan was accepted by 33 votes to 13. Alexander Cadogan, Britain's representative, abstained. Prince Faisal of Saudi Arabia headed the Arab country's opposition. The Jewish state will include the ports of Haifa and Tel Aviv and the whole of the Negev Valley. The Arab will occupy the fertile eastern part. Jerusalem will come under United Nations trusteeship. First reaction from the Jews was one of joy. Crowds gathered in the streets and greeted the birth of their state with traditional dances. Britain's civic administration is expected to withdraw by May. Jews and Arabs will then govern themselves. Arab opposition to the partition scheme has been violent. The call for a holy war against the Jews went out from Cairo. A three-day general strike coincided with an intensive recruiting campaign. As in India, transfer of power in Palestine will bring bloodshed. Two states have been born. For the Holy Land, the immediate future would not bring peace.
Leaders such as Egypt's King Farouk, Jordan's King Abdullah I, and Syria's Shukri al-Quwatli vowed publicly that the Jewish state would not survive. Israel did survive, but at a cost. Thousands dead, deep trauma, and a lingering refugee tragedy on both sides. The pattern repeated. 1956, the Suez Crisis. Egypt's new strongman, Gamal Abdel Nasser, blockaded Israeli shipping and declared, "Our basic objective will be the destruction of Israel." 1967. the Six-Day War. Nasser massed troops in Sinai, expelled UN peacekeepers, and closed the Straits of Tiran. Syria and Jordan joined him. Israel launched a preemptive strike, capturing Jerusalem, the West Bank, Gaza, Sinai, and the Golan Heights in less than a week. Afterward, Arab leaders met in Khartoum and issued the famous 3 no's: no peace, no recognition, no negotiations.
It is an all-out war. That's how Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Dayan describes an invasion of the Golan Heights and the east bank of the Suez by Syria and Egypt. The surprise attacks came early this morning in the air and on the ground. The Egyptians apparently have taken control of at least a portion of the east bank of the Suez. Dayan says it would take several days to drive them out of there, attributing the initial Egyptian successes to the thin line of Israeli defenses in that area. Egypt maintains it has taken control of the entire beach. On the Golan Heights, Syria claims it has taken some Israeli positions, but Israel says the Syrian attack now has been brought under control. As usual, there are conflicting reports on the casualties. Moshe Dayan called Israeli casualties reasonable. Egypt announced that it had lost 10 planes, but that it shot down 11 Israeli planes. Everyone agrees that this is the most serious fighting in the area since the Six-Day War of 1967, and that it developed rapidly. David Burrington reports on the mobilization in Tel Aviv.
1973, the Yom Kippur War. On Israel's holiest day, Egypt under Anwar Sadat and Syria under Hafez al-Assad launched a coordinated surprise attack. Israel survived again, but the shock shook the nation to its core. Leaders who chose war. Over the decades, a series of Arab and Palestinian leaders openly embraced conflict, including Haj Amin al-Husseini, Grand Mufti, anti-Jewish inciter, 1920s to 40s. Gamal Abdel Nasser, Egypt, organized coalitions against Israel, 1950s to 60s. Hafez al-Assad, Syria, hardened the confrontation, 1970s. Ahmed Shukayri, founding chairman of the PLO in 1964, calling for Israel's elimination. Yasser Arafat led the PLO through hijackings, guerrilla warfare, and political struggle. Their rhetoric often denied Jewish indigeneity, framing Jews not as a native people returning home, but as outsiders forcing their way in. Anti-Semitism through Arab eyes. From the Arab perspective, Zionism sometimes appeared as a European colonial project, backed by Western powers, threatening Arab sovereignty and dignity. This perception, combined with old religious hostility, conspiracy theories imported from Europe, and the humiliation of repeated military defeats, fueled a dangerous form of anti-Semitism. Jews became symbols, not neighbors, not people, but targets. Zionism, to many Arabs, did not simply create Israel. It exposed deeper wounds in the region, and those wounds burned. Israel meets Kahane.
Pressure always works if you're stubborn enough.
Well, yeah. How long do you intend to stay here?
Until I get my passport back, and also until I get a guarantee from the government here that I'll be allowed to leave Israel for a month's visit to America.
Why do you want to go to the United States?
I want to make it very, very clear why. First of all, I live here. This is my home. My family is here. I have no interest in going back to America except for one thing, and that is I want to go back there to lead and to organize and to arouse protests against Henry Kissinger's policy here and against the policy of the government of Israel in giving back lands. I think that we here face a disaster. I think it is a tragedy. I think we've seen only the start of a pullback which will place us at the brink of a Holocaust. I want to go back. I intend to lead protests. That's the reason why I don't have the passport.
Kahane. Into this world, Meir Kahane arrived in 1971. Israel already had scars. Graveyards from 1948. Fresh anxieties from the Soviet Union denying Jewish emigration. A rising Palestinian militant movement is launching cross-border attacks. The Israeli establishment looked at Kahane and braced. They knew his reputation from New York. They remembered the Jewish Defense League, part protection, part provocation. Some Israelis, especially those who had lived through pogroms and the Holocaust, quietly understood his anger. Others saw danger written all over him. He founded the political movement Kach and began to speak in the language of urgency. Jews must live without fear. Jews must control their destiny. And enemies who seek their destruction must not be allowed to remain inside the state. He pointed to attacks, shootings, and terror incidents, insisting, "This is not politics, this is survival." Incidents such as cross-border raids in the 1970s, the bloody PLO presence in Lebanon, and attacks on Israeli buses and schools hardened his conviction that Jews would never be safe unless Israel became unapologetically Jewish and unflinchingly strong. For Kahane, the fight had shifted. It was no longer about Brooklyn sidewalks. It was about the right of Jews to exist as a people in their own land. While the world around them grew colder, hostile, and less livable for Jews everywhere. Many Israelis believed he had gone too far. Others whispered that he was only saying aloud what they feared in silence. And with that tension between fear and morality, between memory and power, Kahanism was born. A movement not just about protecting Jews, but about redefining what Jewish power should look like in a world that never seemed finished with them. Kahane would face unimaginable pushback from his own people. Jewish fragility, fear, insecurity, and a warped sense of empathy that erroneously led to Jewish safety being compromised. Kahane and his followers would intend to change that.